Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear further evidence from employees of the TMO. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the panel. I now call Miss Claire Williams, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Miss Williams.
Good morning.
I'm going to ask you to make the affirmation again. I know you made it last time you gave evidence, but I think we released you, so it would be sensible to do it again. I think you should have the words on the screen.
They are. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now do sit down, make yourself comfortable. Right. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Miss Williams, good morning. Can I begin by thanking you very much for attending once again to the inquiry to give your evidence. We are very grateful to you. If you have any difficulty understanding any of my questions or you'd like me to put the question again, I can do that. If you feel you need a break at any time, other than the scheduled breaks, which we will take in the normal way, halfway through the morning and halfway through the afternoon, we can take a break. If you need one, just let us know. One other thing I would ask you to do, just by way of reminding you, is to keep your voice up if you can, so that the transcriber who sits to your right can get your evidence down clearly. Don't nod, don't shake your head. You have to say yes or no, as the case may be. Now, you've made a number of statements to the inquiry. For the purposes of my questions, I'm going to ask you about 5 of them. When you first gave evidence to the inquiry in Module 1, we went through those statements and you confirmed that they were true, save for some corrections. Have you read or reread any of those or each of those statements recently?
I have.
You have. And just again, have you discussed your evidence with anybody before coming here today?
No.
Now, I'm going to begin my substantive questions to you by asking you about some of the means of communication that you had with residents of Grenfell Tower during the project. And can I begin with newsletters? Can we go, please, to your first witness statement at page 23? That's TMO 00840,364. Your first witness statement, page 23, paragraph 121. And you say there, one of the first tasks I undertook on joining TMO was to prepare a Grenfell Tower regeneration newsletter dated 11th September 2013, which picked up on issues that had been raised from a residents' meeting prior to my joining the company. That newsletter was principally to introduce myself to residents and to let them know of future events and drop-in sessions to be able to inform them of the planned works, progress, etc. Were you responsible for preparing all of the Grenfell Tower refurbishment newsletters?
My predecessor, Paul Dunkerton, had started them. I had in my directory 7 or 8 previously, so I followed that route. I did prepare them, but the information within them was on the basis that I'd asked the housing management team and Ryden what information they wanted to put in the newsletter. Because obviously the first one I did was before Ryden were on board, but there were always messages perhaps the housing management team were working on, which meant that it was important they had input so that we were being consistent and being thorough.
Who was it in the housing management team that you would routinely ask for information to put into the regeneration newsletter?
It would be the neighbourhood housing manager, who was Siobhan, Nicola, but I would also ask the neighbourhood officer, the person with the grassroots person, the person who was had day-to-day dealings as well. It's easier just to ask them both because sometimes one might miss something.
And between September 2013 and May 2016, who was the neighbourhood officer, as you say, with who had the grassroots knowledge?
Jan Jones was the hands-on housing officer.
Now, we've counted 21 newsletters distributed to the residents of the Tower between September 2013 and May 2016. Did you prepare them all?
So there were some before my time that Paul Dunkerton had done.
Yes.
I'm not sure on the total numbers. I think we always agreed that the newsletter would only go out if there was something to say. We decided there wouldn't be a monthly one automatically because some months there wasn't anything to report on. So I don't know if the number's 21. It sounds,
Right.
so I think before my time there was about 7 or 9.
Yes, but after your time, would you say that you were responsible ultimately for preparing all of those that went out to the residents?
With the input from our housing management and riding, yes.
Yes. Now, we have seen only 2 of those 21 newsletters which refer to fire safety advice specifically. I'd like just to look at those with you if I can. Can we please go first to the July 2014 newsletter at CST 401919. Let's look at the first page of that first to identify it. There it is. There's the now familiar digger on the front, a photograph there. And if we go to page 2, please, and look at the bottom of that page, you can see that there's a section which says emergency fire arrangements. You see that?
Yes.
And it says, our long-standing stay-put policy stays in force until you are told otherwise. This means that unless there is a fire in your flat or in the hallway outside your flat, you should stay inside your flat. This is because Grenfell was designed according to rigorous fire safety standards. Also, the new front doors for each flat can withstand a fire for up to 30 minutes, which gives plenty of time for the fire brigade to arrive. Do you remember who was responsible for drafting that text?
With all the newsletters I was involved with, having gleaned the information from housing management and Ryden, I would do the draft, and it would go to our communications team, who went through them to make sure there was no jargon and to make sure that the information read clearly. So, whereas this might have come presumably from Janice Ray, myself, the text would have been checked by the communications team to make sure it was legible and that it would be easy to understand, that it wouldn't be too jargony.
Leaving aside the check that the comms team would do to eliminate jargon, it sounds as if, and correct me if this is wrong, that it was you and Janice Ray who had the primary responsibility for drafting that paragraph in this newsletter.
I think you're right, yes. I think we would
Right.
have asked for something like that.
Was that wording based on the advice of any fire safety professional?
Yes, it would have been what had come from the fire brigade and from Carl Stokes, our fire risk assessor.
Can I go to the second newsletter dated May 2016, and that is at JRP 6028, please. And if we go to page 4, the second arrow down has a section called the Stay Put Fire Policy. And it says, the smoke detection systems have been upgraded and extended. The fire brigade has asked us to reinforce the message that if there is a fire which is not inside your own home, you are generally safest to stay put in your home to begin with. The fire brigade will arrive very quickly if a fire is reported. And then it continues, and you can see the advice set out there in those second and third paragraphs there. In particular, in the last paragraph, if there is a fire in the block near your flat and you believe you are at risk and would prefer to evacuate the building, then please do so using the stairs and wait outside the building for the fire brigade to arrive. Again, was it Janice Ray and you who were responsible primarily for drafting that section of this newsletter?
Yes.
And again, was that based on any advice of a fire safety professional?
Yes, again, I think I missed the date of this.
This is May 16.
May 16. So I suspect this came from a query from a resident about where the assembly point was. So it was clear at that point we needed to get a wider message out.
Yes, and I'm going to come to that exact point in a moment. Can we go back then, before we do, to the first newsletter from July 2014, and just have that up on the screen there to remind you of it. There it is, and the second page, bottom paragraph, just have that there. That was the first one I put to you this morning. Can we now look at your first witness statement at paragraph 210 on page 38, please? You're talking here about that newsletter, and you say this at the top of that page. The entry in the newsletter was in part prompted by emails sent by Eddie Defan, noting that he believed Ryden's site compound was taking up the Grenfell designated evacuation meeting point. The entry was to reinforce the fire safety strategy and the instructions and guidance of LFB that all occupants, except those occupying the flat where the fire was, should remain in the flat rather than evacuate to a meeting point. Now, that's how you put it there. Let's then look, please, at the emails at the time. TMO 10006875, please. This is an exchange of emails in July 2014 between Ben Dewis of the LFB, Janice Ray, and you that you referred to in that paragraph. If we can go to page 2, please. We see Ben Dewis's email of the 8th of July, just above halfway down, to Janice Ray. And he says, "Dear Janice, I received this email below from an Edward Defan who you may be aware of, who lives at Grenfell Tower." And then he sets out the text of it. "Dear Ben, please be advised that residents of Grenfell Tower are very concerned about fire safety after the recent closure of all land and rights of way to the west and north of Grenfell Tower. We are also very concerned that we have no idea where to assemble should there be a fire in the Grenfell Tower, as there is no open space in the vicinity that's available to our community. Please can you help ensure that the fire brigade will monitor the current changes on Lancaster West Estate that impact on our fire safety, and could you also inform us where we should assemble in the event of a fire? Thank you for your assistance with this matter." And he signs off Edward Defan, Grenfell Action Group. And then Ben Dewis continues, "The contractor has contacted the local station to inform them of changes to access points and riser access. The local station are making arrangements to carry out a familiarisation visit for local crews. Unfortunately, it would appear the same courtesy has not been given to the residents to update them on their emergency procedures. Could I ask what the measures being taken in regard to fire safety at the premises are during the refurbishment works? Regards, Ben Dewis, LFB." And then if you go up, please, if we scroll up the page through page 2, we can see that Janice Ray, can we please go to page 2? We can see, and scroll up further, please. You can see that Janice Ray, same day, forwards Ben Dewis's message to her on to you, and she says, "Hi Claire, please see the message below which I've just received from an LFB inspection officer who has received an email from Eddie Defan. Do we need to write to residents on the issue of fire safety during the works?" You see that? "We could put something together to reassure them that there is still a stay-put strategy and reiterating the procedures they should follow, works in hand to enhance fire safety in the longer term, etc. Perhaps this has already been done, ? I need to respond to this man and would like to be able to emphasise what we have already done, meetings, letters, etc. Now, I've shown you all of that. My questions are this. Janice Ray appears to be asking you what the fire safety arrangements were at Grenfell Tower at the time. Was that because you were responsible for fire safety arrangements during the refurbishment?
I read it slightly differently, I'm afraid. It says we could put something together to reassure them. She's not saying that there isn't a policy. She's saying there is a policy and we need to reassure them.
Yes.
I'm sorry, just to... put a slightly different angle on it.
Yes, no, I understand. My question is perhaps a slightly different one. She's asking you in particular about what the fire safety arrangements were at Grenfell Tower. Was she asking you in particular because you were the person who was responsible for fire safety arrangements in the building during refurbishment?
I don't believe she is asking me what the arrangements are for fire safety, because she's clear there's a stay-put policy. But during the works, I was the project manager for the contract, so I probably had more knowledge about what was happening than anyone else.
Right. My question was, well, why was she sending this message to you and asking you these questions in particular rather than somebody else at the TMO?
Because I would know what correspondence had gone out to the residents.
Now, you can see that she suggests writing to residents on fire safety. Was this when you decided to include fire safety fire safety advice in the next newsletter?
Yes, it was.
Did you discuss sending a letter to all residents of the tower expressly about fire safety?
Not a letter as such, because we did the newsletter which went to all residents. But I believe as well as that, we put up posters and in the notice boards, and I believe that we did some more reinforcement with Ryden to talk to people and just remind them and say, have you seen this? So it was not just a case of putting something through the door, it was actually, you know, when you had face-to-face contact, reminding people.
Right. Was there a reason why you didn't send a specific letter to all residents, about the fire safety arrangements during the refurbishment, as opposed to having it as an item among other items in the regeneration newsletter?
I don't remember talking about a letter as such, but you do have to be wary about putting through unsolicited letters through doors, because people will perhaps not pay as much attention to them. Whereas with our newsletter, I think people were expecting it and would be more likely to read it. But I don't remember discussing whether we sent a letter to people.
Right. Was it your experience at the time, July 2014, that residents on the whole would pay more attention to the regeneration newsletter than to a specific circular letter on fire safety matters?
I hadn't thought of it that way, so no, I have no view on whether they would do it. It would be a vanity to assume that they read my newsletters more than other circular letters, but I think circular letters generally are not as well received.
Right. Now, if you look at the message from Janice Ray to you, in the middle paragraph, she says that you should put something together to reassure them that there is still a stay-put strategy and reiterating procedures that they should follow, etc. And then asks the question, perhaps this has already been done. My question is, what had you actually done to update residents about the emergency procedures to follow during the refurbishment?
The emergency procedures effectively stayed the same. There was a stay-put policy. So, as you saw, the two newsletters were there just to remind people and say, with verbal communication as well, just to keep people up to date, because whereas people would have possibly still had their tenant handbook saying, you know, this is the policy, a lot of people would have put it in a drawer 10 years previously and not looked at it since. So this was a reminder.
Yes, I see. But what is the answer to the second question she asks in that paragraph? Perhaps this has already been done. What had already been done?
We hadn't reminded people about a stay-put policy previously. Obviously, you know, my role was to inform residents about the regeneration works, so that wasn't something I would normally have done, but we took the opportunity to use my newsletter.
Yes. And I think you agree with me that it looks as if you took that opportunity in response to Mr. Dewis's message to you, to the TMO, which was in turn prompted by Eddie Defan's own alert to him.
Yes, you're right, and it again went in the Link magazine subsequent, because we realised that perhaps people needed a reminder.
Yes. Can we look at TMO 10006884, please. This is an email, not quite in the same chain, but on the same date, and certainly on the same theme. Can we look at the second email down? You here send an email to Simon O'Connor, 8th July, copy to Janice Ray and Christina Stefanu, who I think was the Ryden residence liaison officer, wasn't she?
Yes.
Yes. And you say, Simon, thanks for this. I think we should use the coffee morning and your signage, new notice board up in the main entrance, to remind residents that we have a stay put policy. This is because the doors should be FD30 if you look at the TMO renewed these to tenants in the last few years, and most of the leaseholders' doors are the originals, which should also be smoke/fire resistant. I will work with my colleague Janice to give you the appropriate stay put signage for the notice board, and we will respond to the fire brigade too. Is it right that you gave directions to Simon Connor about the stay put policy only in reaction to Ben Dewis's message to you? It looks that way on the documents. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Now, can we go to forward in time to TMO 00860222, please? This is another email exchange between you and Janice Ray, dated 29th of April 2016, shortly before the second newsletter with fire safety advice was prepared in May 2016 that we saw earlier on. And if you look at the last line of that email, under question 2, you see that you say, they asked how we publicised our stay put policy, they being the LFB. I attached the relevant newsletter and I will put this in the May 2016 one again. So it looks like the reference to the fire safety arrangements at Grenfell Tower went into the May 2016 regeneration newsletter, again in reaction to, or as a result of, the LFB asking you how you publicised your stay put policy.
Yes.
Yes. Did you only include fire safety advice on evacuation procedures in the May 2016 newsletter following the LFB intervention?
I'm trying to remember. I suspect it was a case that in the interim, if you speak to people and there are people who were unclear, I would have put it in again. So it could be partially the LFB or partially from, discussions with residents saying, oh, I didn't know about that. Okay, it gets put in the newsletter again.
Right. See, we've seen no fire safety advice in any of the regeneration newsletters between July 2014 and May 2016. Right. Can you explain why that is?
I would expect that the notices are up in the building and the message has been put out there through the Link magazine and through our contractor and other sort of meetings, other drop-in meetings, etc.
Yes. And would it be fair to say that fire safety advice was only given specifically to residents in the regeneration newsletters, ad hoc, sporadically, and reactively to external prompts?
Yes.
Why was there no permanent strategy to keep residents regularly informed and updated about the evacuation procedures during the refurbishment?
As I've said, the emergency procedure stayed the same, which was stay put. We took measures to remind people of what the policy was. We spoke to them. We put it in the newsletter. That was the way we demonstrated that we'd told people about the stay put policy and that we'd informed them. I don't know what you'd expect us to put it in every newsletter. That would be unusual and would take emphasis off the other areas of information we wanted to get across to them.
Yes, I see. You referred to Link magazine earlier on. Just to be clear, Link magazine was a magazine that was sent to all TMO residents across the borough, wasn't it?
Yes.
So it wasn't Grenfell specific?
Oh, no, it went to all residents.
Yes. Can we please look at your second statement, TMO 00842 please, at page 22. And let's look together at paragraph 94 there. You say there, towards the top of the page, I have been asked what language and special needs provision was in place for communicating fire safety advice to residents. It was not my role to communicate fire safety advice to residents, and I'm not the best person to provide this information. Whose role was it to provide fire safety advice to residents during the refurbishment?
The fire safety advice to residents was given initially in their handbook. It would be given out by my colleague who managed health and safety, and then obviously I managed the regeneration contract, and that's why we put in our newsletter the fire safety advice that we did.
Yes, I'm just trying to understand what you say in that second sentence in paragraph 94, where you say it wasn't your role to communicate fire safety advice to residents. And if it wasn't your role, Miss Williams, whose role was it?
The health and safety team would be advising across the organisation on what the fire safety advice was.
I see.
And so within the building, the fire safety advice did not change during the refurbishment.
Given that we've seen and you've said that you had a role in devising or drafting those two sections of the regeneration newsletter, July 14 and May 2016, is it not in fact the case that you did have a role in communicating fire safety advice to residents, at least to that extent?
I had the means by which to communicate fire safety advice. I wasn't the instigator of the fire safety advice, and the fire safety advice did not change. So the newsletter I put out was an appropriate means of communication. But to say I wasn't the instigator of that advice, and so I was the means by which it was rolled out.
Yes, I see. And let me just try in a slightly different way. You say here it wasn't your role to communicate fire safety advice to residents. If it wasn't your role to do that, can you explain, or how can you reconcile that statement with your role in the appearance of fire safety advice in the July 2014 and May 2016 newsletters?
Yeah, no, I reiterate that the organisation had a health and safety team who would roll out fire safety advice. My newsletter was the means by which that was done. If the fire safety advice during the regeneration works had changed, I would have obviously had to include that at very early days within any meetings or with any communication. But the fire safety advice to residents during the works had not changed. Now,
I want to ask you about your relationship with residents' groups. Sticking with this statement and the same page, can you just get down to the next paragraph? You say, I have been asked to detail the interaction I had with the Grenfell Compact. The TMO gave the Compact recognition during the refurbishment, with Peter Madison and Kiran Singh attending their meetings. I believe that the details of meetings would also be advertised in the refurbishment newsletter. I did not attend any of these meetings. Now, it's right, isn't it, that the Grenfell Compact was only granted recognition in September 2015?
I would have thought it was about that time, if not a bit earlier, yes.
And were you aware that it was granted recognition after something of a battle?
I'm aware there was a lot of toing and froing, yes.
Right. Why did you not attend any of the meetings of the Grenfell Compact?
I believe the Compact wanted to take things up to a higher level, so they wanted to meet my director rather than myself.
What was the basis or source of that belief?
I was never asked to attend, and I think quite early on they were clear that they wanted decision makers over things that weren't just the refurbishment. It was more, there are other areas to cover, whereas obviously my role was specifically about the refurbishment.
Right. Did you yourself decide not to attend those meetings, or were you directed not to do so?
I don't think they ever asked for me. I don't think the compact themselves ever asked for me.
Even if they didn't ask for you, did it not occur to you at the time that you ought to go, if only to hear their concerns from the horse's mouth and be able to address, to the extent that you could, those concerns face to face?
I was able to review the minutes that came out of those meetings, and I was asked to deal with any issues that refurbishment related. I wasn't asked to attend and say, obviously I had a keen interest, but it was done via debriefings with the minutes.
Yes, I understand that. I just want to see if I can dig a little deeper. Did it occur to you at the time that it would be a good idea for you to go along to the compact meetings, see the individuals involved, hear their concerns, and be able to address those concerns face to face if you could?
I wasn't asked, and Peter Madison, my director, had a very good understanding on all the issues that would be raised, and I would have just been an extra body. So no, I was quite happy to understand from Peter Madison what had been asked, what the issues were. And as I say, they weren't all to do with the refurbishment. There were other issues raised which were taken up by him and Kieran Singh as managers.
Yes. I think, is it fair to say that you were closer to the detail, the day-to-day detail of the refurbishment than Peter Madison was?
Yes.
Yes. Did he tell you not to attend the meetings and that he would handle those compact meetings even in respect of refurbishment questions?
I never saw anything to say that the compact wanted me there. I think it was their forum, it was their option. If they'd asked, I would gladly have attended. But I think, as I say, that they wanted to take it to a higher level with Mr Madison in attendance.
Even if Mr Madison didn't have a firm grip on the detail, the day-to-day detail of the refurbishment?
I believe that many of the people there would have, well, I know they did. I know there was a list of issues raised, which I then dealt with the minute they were presented to me. So issues with the refurbishment were dealt with very promptly, and I say the compact did not ask for me to be there.
Can I ask you to look at your first witness statement again, please? This time, page 40, paragraph 220. You say at the top of the page there, I had seen some blogs at some point and I decided that they were negative and vitriolic and that I would not look at them again. Those blogs were ultimately blocked on our system so they could not be viewed. Who was it at the TMO who decided to block the blogs on the TMO's system?
I don't know.
Do you remember when the blogs were blocked on the TMO's system?
No, I was told that was the case. So I don't remember, I'm afraid. It would have been fairly early on, 13, 14, I suspect.
Right. Even vaguely, do you remember how far you were into the refurbishment project when the blogs were blocked?
No, I'm afraid I don't, because we didn't look at them, so I don't know.
Okay. Now, before you stopped looking at them, did you yourself consider that they raised criticisms or concerns that might have some validity, or at least be worth investigating?
The early ones I looked at, I wasn't familiar with the subject matter. It was about, I don't know, was it about the libraries or the nursery? There were issues which I wasn't familiar with, so.
Right. So, just to put my question again, those that you did see, was there anything that you saw in there that you thought might have some validity or be worth investigating?
The only one I did see that I remember pertinent to the regeneration works was a comment saying, when are they going to start? They've told us they were going to start and they haven't started yet. why are the TMO not keeping to their timetable? That was the only one, I think, that I remember that related to the regeneration works.
And did you investigate that question or suggest that it should be answered?
That the style of the blog was rhetoric. I knew from where I was that obviously works were going to move forward and where we were in the programme. So I felt that we were responding to that blog by actually saying, look, this is what's happening to our programme, this is where we are. So that was the only one that I saw that was anything to do with the work I was involved with.
Did you actually take up the question, when are these works going to start, and seek to address that question with any resident in the tower?
By the time I came on board, we were actually doing consultation with residents and following through the timetable that had been put in the previous newsletters. So the previous newsletters gave a start on site of early 2014. So as far as I was concerned, I was still on track for what had been rolled out earlier. So no, I didn't take it up with anybody in the tower, because we were, I think we were a month or two late, but the earlier newsletters all said start on site early 14, which is what did happen.
Did you, well, when you say you decided that these were negative and vitriolic and you wouldn't look at them again, leave aside the rhetoric, what was it about them that you thought was negative and vitriolic?
They were libellous, they were clearly slanted, unsubstantiated information. That was, that was probably the crux of it.
Did you consider that the blogs might be a way in which the residents, or some of the residents of Grenfell Tower, sought to bring issues that affected them personally and their homes to the TMO's attention?
As a means of communication with the TMO, it was not perhaps an appropriate media. I think the blocking of the blogs meant that we didn't treat it as an appropriate communication. I think there was concern over how representative the blogs were. And as I say, a lot of time they were libellous, unsubstantiated and clearly slanted. There was never any comment about the good work we were doing in terms of employment initiatives. All the things we did with residents, they were just overlooked. It was sort of a slanted in one way. And so it wasn't something we would look at as a communication to be responded to.
Let me just show you one example of a blog to see if you can help with it. IWS 402230, please. Now this has become known as the Stairs of Shame blog, dated 13th of August 2014. Now I know that's about 11 months after you arrived at the TMO. And you can see the photographs, and particularly the middle photograph, in the blog about what Mr. Defan described as the Stairs of Shame, and he gave some evidence about that last week. Just looking at it, does this ring a bell with you? Is this one of those that you looked at and decided was negative and vitriolic, or was this one you didn't see?
I hadn't seen this at the time.
You didn't see this at the time? All right. So can we say with some confidence that August 14, mid-August 14, post-date of the time that you stopped looking at the blog. Yes?
Yes, I wouldn't have seen this.
All right. Did you yourself not consider that by deciding not to read the blogs, you were essentially cutting yourself off from a source of information about the service that the TMO was providing to the residents of Grenfell Tower as its, quotes, customers, unquotes?
This was not a means of communication with the TMO. As I've said, it was unsubstantiated information, perhaps by a very limited group of residents. And there were other ways of raising issues with us. The style of this, the approach of this, it is not something that would be useful, and most of us couldn't see it because it was blocked from the server. So,
Can I just ask you, you said in your statement that you regarded the blogs that you did see as being unhelpful and vitriolic in language and so on. Presumably someone told you that they were blocked, or did you try and see later ones and found you couldn't get access to them?
I think, initially I knew that they were there when I started my job. I did look, and then after a time you couldn't find them at all. They were cut off the server. I think it was... sorry, I'll ask your question again, Mr.
Well, I wondered whether somebody told you and others that the blogs had been blocked, or whether you just couldn't get access to them when you tried.
I think I might have tried to get access to see what the latest was, and at that time I couldn't get it, and at that point I was probably told that that's why. All
right, and I don't know whether you know who took the decision to block them.
No, I don't.
Yes, Mr. Tenant.
Were there, in your experience at the time, were there other blogs or groups of residents within the TMO estate more generally who were exhibiting the same level of dissatisfaction with the management of their building, or was this limited to the residents of Grenfell Tower?
My involvement at the TMO was in managing this contract, so I wouldn't know about TMO-wide, if that was your question. But in terms of Grenfell, this was the only blog I was aware of.
I see. Did anybody ever say to you, oh, well, we don't worry about the Grenfell Action Group, we get these blogs all across the estate, we get them all the time? Or did you get the impression that this was a one-off for that building only?
I think this was, say, in terms of my knowledge, which is, the Grenfell project was all I was involved with at the time. So this was the only one I was aware of, but nobody told me there were others. So.
Did you at any point ask yourself, well, how come these residents of this building in particular feel so strongly about the way that their building is managed?
I was speaking to lots of residents at the time. I was doing consultation with residents. I know that this isn't the general feeling. I've met many people have disassociated from this particular group. So I know that this isn't the way that most residents think. Obviously, this blog, as I say, I know I had seen some that covered the library or the nursery or something like that. So I know that it wasn't just about the tower. I know there are other issues covered in it.
Well, let me ask the question slightly differently. Did you at any point ask yourself, how come the residents responsible for this blog felt so strongly about the way that their building was managed, that they felt it necessary to articulate themselves in the way that one can see here?
I again believe from talking to people and being, out there on the streets and talking to different people. I was dealing with a project at Verity Close initially, which was new windows, and I think one of the authors of this lived in Verity Close till he moved, and Mr. Connor moved in 2014. So I knew what people were thinking, and that this was not the way that people were thinking. You know, I was talking to people and asking people questions, and as I say, people would disassociate from the Grenfell Action Group. They would tell me specifically, I'm not part of that. We do not think like that. We think that, you know, what you're doing for this building is positive. Thank you. So that is why it is talking to people and it's knowing your residents. That's why I think this isn't representative.
Right. Did you ever ask anybody else at the TMO the question, why are these particular residents who have published this blog so aggrieved?
I don't know how to put it in such straightforward terms, but I think this blog had been going for a little while. And as I say, as far as I'm concerned, it covered other subjects. I think there were other people who were, RBKC, I believe, were also sort of mentioned. So, no, I didn't ask in those specific questions, why was it these residents? But obviously, I met Mr. Defan. I know Mr. O'Connor, who was involved with this, he moved to Ireland early 2014, so I suspect his input should have reduced. And so I met many people enough to know that this was not representative.
You say not representative.
Yeah.
Was that so during the entire time that you were responsible for managing the refurbishment project?
I didn't look at it because I haven't seen all of the comments on it because I didn't look at it. Right. So I don't know about that, I'm afraid.
Did there ever come a time when you learnt that what those responsible for this blog were saying, Mr. Defan in particular, that what he was saying was in fact representative of many people in the building?
I cannot say that I'm ever aware that anything Mr. Defan said was representative of many people in the building.
Right. When you arrived at the TMO in September 2013, did anybody tell you, whether David Gibson or Peter Madison, about the residents at Grenfell Tower?
I was given a briefing that before I started, there was a chap called Paul Dunkerton who'd been the main post holder. Then there was a gap. There was probably a 3-month gap with a temporary chap.
Yes.
So he gave me a briefing, and then Peter and David, my managers, would also give me a briefing. So I don't remember either of them. I don't remember whether they did it together or separately, but I got a lot of information over a period when I started, and I was aware that there was an active resident in the building, yes.
Just one?
No, I think there was also a leaseholder group.
Right. So what did they tell you about the residents, their concerns, the way they expressed their concerns, the way they communicated with the TMO?
Obviously, it would have been said there was a blog, but I wasn't aware of a lot of the long-standing history, perhaps, which I now am, because a lot of the information I could review was in the electronic directories, in the files, and there was clearly the 3-month, the temporary chap, the files were very scant. Paul Dunkerton's information was generally good, but there were still gaps in that. So, yeah, so I was getting to grips, and I was briefed by, say, Peter and David more than anybody else, but I don't know that they briefed me on all the ins and outs of the issues prior to my arrival.
Yes, I see. So just to be clear, and correct me if this is wrong, but they never told you, did they, about the history of the EMB, the Estate Management Board?
I was aware that there were concerns over it, but I didn't know anything more about their background.
What about the Lancaster West Residents Association?
Yeah, no, I think when we spoke last time about the Lancaster West Residents Association, I wasn't so clear on them. So I know there was a Lancaster West Residents Association because it's my understanding they took over from the EMB effectively, or they had a role on influencing the estate decisions. But I say I didn't have any involvement with them when the scheme started because they weren't in place. So I think they only came in place probably similar time to the compact, I would think, about the end of, or about the same time as the compact,
right.
About the autumn.
Did anybody give you a history of the Grenfell Action Group, GAG?
Only in the terms of the fact that it existed, and Mr. DeFarm was probably the main mover.
What did they say about him?
I don't remember. It was many years ago, and I think it was, the fact that I would probably meet him very soon was probably the gist, because, say, as I was going out on the estate, that I would be involved.
Can we then look, please, at TMO 10007353? This is an email from Peter Madison to Janice Ray, 4th September 2014. And Peter Madison says, as we discussed briefly, I think Mr. Defan's blog is scaremongering and could be quite frightening to residents. I think we need to send out a very clear message to residents in a letter or newsletter about the current safety of the block and how we will maintain this over the duration of the works. It would be good to be able to put out a clear statement with the support of the fire brigade. And we can see that you're copied into this. He then goes on to say, however, before we do so, I think we need to do a further belt and braces check on fire safety compliance in the block and stitch the fire brigade into this. Do you remember what your response was to this email?
No.
Did you, in fact, attempt to arrange putting a statement out with the support of the fire brigade?
As I remember, this was all about the same time as the Ben Dewis email. So I think, so I have got the timescale right, but this was again reiterating the stay put policy. Peter perhaps wasn't as hands-on in terms of what we'd already done with the fire brigade, and also we had Carl Stokes attending the block on a regular basis. So I think that was what he was asking us to do, which I think we already had in hand.
Yes. Did you in fact do a further belt and braces check on fire safety compliance within Grenfell Tower?
I believe that's why Carl Stokes was there on a very regular basis. He was our fire risk assessor, and the idea was that obviously he did supplementary checks to Ryden's own checks in terms of their work and any issues.
Right. So are you saying that the belt and braces check on fire safety compliance in Grenfell Tower was actually done by Carl Stokes as part of his fire risk assessment?
I obviously haven't seen my or Janice's response, but that is what I would expect it would be, yes.
Right. I mean, I'm just asking you whether you remember whether there was in fact a further belt and braces check.
I think Carl went there on a regular basis, so I don't know if this coincided with one of his checks or whether he did an additional one as a result of this.
Can we go to TMO 008461106, please, and look at page 2? This is an email exchange between you and Peter Madison on the 13th of April 2015. Copy to David Gibson. And you say, Peter, please see the attached message from Grenfell Community Unite sent Easter Monday. I've sent a holding message and have touted around the proposed response as attached. Robert Black walked by on Friday, and we discussed the fact that the preference was not to meet up with the Grenfell Community Unite group, which could be a showcase for Mr. Defan. Now, this is April 2015. It's right, I think, that by this time, in fact, the week before, 6th of April 2015, David Collins had asked the TMO to recognise Grenfell Community Unite as a residents' association for Grenfell Tower. Do you remember that?
I remember the correspondence, I don't remember the date.
Right. Do you know why Robert Black was concerned that the meeting would be, quotes, a showcase for Mr. Defan, close quotes?
It was my wording, showcase. I don't know that was Robert Black's wording. I think what had happened previously with meetings with Mr. Defan in attendance was that the agenda would be disrupted by Mr. Defan raising issues in a loud voice and effectively making an organised meeting quite difficult to hold. I think that's really the gist, that there were still issues about how Mr. Defan was able to attend a meeting and behave. So, but I say the showcase word, please don't attribute that to Robert Black because this is mine.
I see. I was going to ask you. So the words, well, so when Robert Black walked by and you discussed the fact that the preference was not to meet up with the Grenfell Community Unite group, was that his preference, or was it your preference, or did you share that preference?
I had no feelings particularly about the Grenfell Community Unite. If they were going to be a representative group, then that would be great.
When you said could be a showcase for Mr. Defan, were you adding those words because that was your impression, or were you reciting something that you perceived Robert Black felt as well?
I don't honestly remember. I don't know if Robert Black had been to meetings with Mr. Defan. I don't know.
I see. Going back to an earlier answer of yours just a moment ago, you referred to earlier meetings at which you said Mr. Defan was disruptive, raising issues in a loud voice. Can you remember what were those previous meetings with Mr. Defan in attendance where you say Mr. Defan disrupted the agenda?
The first meeting I went to, the first meeting with residents, was September 13, so literally probably a week after I'd arrived. And it was, Peter Madison was there, myself, I think there were a couple of councillors, and Mr. Defan arrived with a friend who, the agenda was clearly laid out, it had been publicised, and Mr. Defan quite early on chose to shout his opinions about different issues. He sidetracked the meeting. He effectively meant that other people were uncomfortable. Other residents were eye-rolling. And it meant that other residents couldn't hear the information which was being imparted. They couldn't even ask the questions they would normally do if it were in a proper meeting forum. It was, say, upsetting because it meant other residents didn't hear what they'd come to hear, couldn't understand what was being proposed because Mr. Defan just wanted to spoil it. I attended other consultation meetings with Mr. Defan. For example, in the drop-in, in the show flat, where again he would come in, shout the odds, make other people leave the room. The flat had several bedrooms and a living room. People would walk out of the room. So again, that meant that they didn't hear what we were there to present. It was, you needed to manage Mr. Defan so that residents could get information, and that was what was difficult.
Did anybody, to your knowledge, including you, actually try to talk to Mr. Defan to get to the bottom of what his concerns really were?
So I was probably, the third or fourth person on the scheme, and obviously I had directors as well. So during my time there, the only time I felt that we ever contacted and got through to Mr. Defan was we had a meeting about the heating in the show flat. We showed what the new setup would be with the radiators, with the boiler. And we had our consultants there because obviously the M&E stuff is really complicated and you do need to understand enough about it. And the system was different. And I think what a lot of the work in the tower was different. And that was, people had lived there for 10, 20 years. So any change means you need to talk people through it. And so he was there, again, been very difficult, lots of residents there, all trying to understand something. And so the M&E consultant, who was a chap, took him to one side and he must have spent half hour with him. And at the end, Mr. Defan, as he walked by me, said, "That's the best information I've ever got out of the TMO." And that was because he listened. And I did follow it up with an email because it was the first time I've ever heard Mr. Defan say anything positive. And I said, "Thank you for saying that you understood this and that, this was a useful meeting for you."
Yes, I see.
But as I say, it was only because the M&E consultant, there were, I don't know how many people there, 30 give or take, spent a half hour with Mr. Defan to talk him through everything.
Right. That's an insight. Did you learn something from that experience that might be the best way to address, cater for, cooperate with Mr. Defan in order to assist him with his concerns? So to take the M&E example, that might be the best way of actually, as you put it, managing Mr. Defan.
Yes, but bear in mind, he's one household. There are 120 households there. But also he was able to, or would shift the goalposts slightly. So, for example, with the windows, we had a meeting with the windows going the show flat. This is how you open them. They had two mechanisms. They had a casement operation, then they had a tilt and turn so that you could clean them. So we showed people how these worked, and again, people had only before had sliding single glazed aluminium windows. So, all different. This is our chance to roll out to people. We stood there and showed them how to open the windows. They later on had a handbook, and again, we did it again. But so he saw the windows. We had really positive feedback from that window session. There wasn't one person who said, these windows are, not what we wanted, because obviously we'd consulted with them sort of a year previously. But then I think probably about this time, April 15, Mr. Defan says he doesn't want his windows in unless we acknowledge Grenfell Community Unite. He's on the 16th floor in a building where you've got mast climbers to access the building. So, he'd always move the goalpost slightly. So it was quite hard to deal with his different concerns. I think one of my issues is that he would never engage with me. I think he would, if he saw me, I would have longed for him to say, "Good morning." He wouldn't do that. He would walk by saying, "Oh, the TMO rubbish, this place is a slum." He was, he would walk by like that. And I think at one point, Simon O'Connor was with me when he did that. And Simon O'Connor of Ryden said, "Do you know how aggressive that sounded?" And he took him to task, but nobody else did.
Did you ever have any training or ask for any training from those who were supervising you about about conflict resolution or resident engagement to deal with not just the way in which, or what it was that Mr. Defan was saying, but the way in which he was saying it? Did you ever receive any training or guidance?
Yes, I have had conflict resolution training. I've done quite a lot of resident engagement. My previous role, which probably there nearly 5 years, was dealing with regeneration of a 60s estate, which meant dealing with, I think I dealt with residents, say, 15 blocks, and also where leaseholders were paying for their work. So very difficult resident engagement because people were paying, and that always means they're more likely to engage. So I have done that before, but I think Mr. Defan did need more attention. I think that, I don't know how you would deal with somebody who clearly for a long time there were issues that he felt needed to be raised. And so it's not as though it was just with the refurbishment. I think, it was with RBKC, he had issues, it was with the TMO. It was something that was perhaps too big to manage for me, because my role was to deal with 120 households, not one household.
Did you go to anybody more senior to you in the TMO and ask for assistance in dealing with the matters that Mr. Defan was raising and the way in which he was raising them?
You appreciate if Mr. Defan put in complaints or anything like that to us, we would read them very carefully and coordinate them. I think Peter Madison became a person to coordinate responses from him, because he would quite often go to different people to ask the same question. But I think it's not just a question of me and how I manage resident engagement. It's also an issue of Mr. Defan and how he perceived his landlord. So I think even if I had had advice on a one-to-one basis, I think it would still have been a mountain to climb. So I dealt with many other residents, and I've never had any issues of the scale that Mr. Defan presented, I'm afraid.
You see, he would say, and we've heard his evidence, and I'm summarising it probably unfairly and inaccurately. I hope not, but I may be, and there's a risk of that. He would say that he had to resort to this kind of method of communication because the TMO had routinely ignored, belittled and marginalised him and all the other residents, so far as he could see, in the building. What would you say to that?
I would say that Mr. Defan had issues before we even started on site, because I think the previous blogs were about the calc, weren't they? The early ones that I saw. So I think he'd had issues for a long time, and I think the way they manifested themselves in terms of the blog and the way he dealt with us wasn't conducive to building a relationship. I think his preference was for an adversarial stance rather than for a negotiation. And I think that's why when David Collins came on board into the block, who I know has been here, David Collins' style of dialogue was more approachable, which is why I think more people then joined the compact. Prior to that, it had been Mr. Defan and a small group of his friends. But when Mr. Collins sort of came on the scene, he was more approachable, and that expanded the membership of it. But I say, it's very difficult, but say, I've dealt with many other people in terms of this building, and I know that Mr. Defan isn't representative, and I hope that people felt that I dealt with them fairly and appropriately in my role.
So your recollection is, to be blunt, that Mr. Defan was an outlier and that the majority of people in the building didn't feel the way he felt. Is that your recollection?
Yeah, so people did have issues, but not on the same scale or took the same stance as Mr. Defan.
Right. Now, going back to this email, there was a discussion with you and Mr. Black about whether the TMO should meet Grenfell Community Unite. What did you decide? That you shouldn't meet them?
It was me passing the message on. I didn't make the decision.
How was not meeting Grenfell Community Unite ever going to be constructive?
we were already talking to the residents on a one-to-one basis and getting a lot more feedback, perhaps. But I think the Grenfell Community Unite, as I say, I don't think it was just issues about the refurbishment. It was about other areas that Mr. Defan and the group wanted to discuss.
Can we look at Peter Madison's response to you of the same day, 13th of April 2015, at page 1, please? And you've sent him a draft of something, and he says to you in paragraph 2, as one of his main comments, some redrafting of the following para is needed, see highlighted section, and then I'll read this to you. In your email, you ask whether the TMO would acknowledge the Grenfell Community Unite group as a representative voice of leaseholders and tenants. I'm advised that this group will not be recognised by the TMO as there is a residents' association already in existence. The TMO are currently working with the existing Lancaster West Residents Association and are currently making arrangements with them to hold an AGM. Mr. Defan will have historic communication from the TMO dating back to early 2014 relating to forming an alternative residents group. Now, it's right, isn't it, that Lancaster West Residents Association wasn't actually functioning before the AGM, was it?
That's true.
Yes. What arrangements were the TMO in fact making for the Lancaster West Residents Association to hold an AGM?
It was being managed by our resident engagement team, so I wasn't involved with what they were doing in terms of the AGM.
So you don't know?
No.
Right. Do you know how Grenfell Tower residents could raise their concerns through the Lancaster West Residents Association at the time, April 15?
As the Lancaster West Residents Association wasn't in being, I would expect any of their concerns, if they're about the refurbishment, to go to Ryden, if they're about their housing, to go to the housing office at the base of the tower, or 100 yards from the base of the tower. You know, they had direct communication with us that the Lancaster West Residents Association would probably have a wider overview of the estate and what was happening. But as I say, there was already access to the TMO via the local housing office.
Right. Now, you refer to historic communications with Edward Defan. Were you aware that Janet Edwards had actually told Edward Defan in September 2014, so 6 or 7 months before this, that the TMO did not object to residents forming a Grenfell Tower Improvement Works residents group, as well as working with the Lancaster West Residents Association?
With this document, it looks to me as though I started it and then Peter added things in. So it might not all have been my wording, some of this. I don't think I knew about Janet Edwards' communication at the time.
Do you know why the TMO initially refused to recognise this residents group?
You've referred to Janet Edwards' previous communication. It says they will not be recognised as there's already a residents' association in existence. I'm sorry, I only know what's here.
Right. So you don't have any knowledge of the history of this, is that right?
No, I don't.
Do you agree that before the Grenfell Compact was recognised, as it was eventually in July 2015, after residents had invited Victoria Borwick, the MP, to intervene, before that, the only way that residents could raise concerns with the TMO was on an individual basis?
Well, the EMB predated the Lancaster West Residents Association, didn't it? So previously, presumably, if there was an estate problem, whether it was dumping or antisocial behaviour, they would have, again, on immediate things, you'd expect them to report direct to the TMO. Any of these residents' associations will probably be more overriding across estate issues. Otherwise, we were there doing a day-to-day job and you would talk to us straight away rather than go to a residents' association.
Right, but what was your experience of the EMB by, and indeed before April 15, being an effective conduit for Grenfell Tower residents to raise their concerns and worries with the TMO?
I think the EMB, when I started, was winding down. I suspect they weren't meeting as often. I don't know whether the residents of Grenfell belong to the, how many residents of Grenfell belong to the EMB. So,
that's right.
yeah, I'm sorry to
No, that's right.
dance around it, but I don't actually know how many of the Grenfell residents were involved with the EMB prior to the work. So
No.
I don't know how many, but say we were always there. The office was originally in the base of the tower, then it moved 100 yards away.
So given that the EMB was in a state of being wound down in September 13 when you joined the TMO, is it right that between that time, late 2013, and the spring of 2015, indeed summer of 2015, and the recognition of the Grenfell Compact, the only way that residents could raise their concerns and worries about the refurbishment with you was on an individual basis?
Yes, which people did, yes.
Yes, so there was no collective voice.
No, but bear in mind, there's 120 households with disparate issues or disparate concerns. So...
But they weren't all disparate, were they? There were some common issues, weren't
there were some common issues, but people would also raise them individually, which became a pattern. So...
Was there a reluctance, so far as you could perceive it, in the TMO, come the spring of 2015, to allowing the Grenfell residents to express themselves collectively so as to make a louder, larger voice?
No, I don't think there was. I think what you would want is for it to be a representative group. And I think, say, with David Collins being there, that meant that more people were attracted to the group and that their numbers increased.
I see.
And that would make it more, so being representative would be a more useful body.
I see. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment? I've come to a reasonably natural break.
Yes, well, if it suits you, I'm sure it would be a good point. Thank you. Well, as you know, Ms. Williams, we have a break during the morning. We'll take it now. We'll come back at 25 to 12, please. And as with everyone else, I have to ask you, please, not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it during the breaks. All right? Thank you very much. Will you go with the usher, please? Right, 25 to 12, please. Yes, would you ask Miss Williams to come back in, please? Right, Miss Williams, ready to carry on?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Ms. Williams, I just want to go back to the blog question very briefly, if I may. Can the witness please be shown RBK 50857 at page 7? Now, this is the end of a report update by you. If you look at the bottom of the page there, date 19th of August 2014. And if you look at the top of the screen, you see that it says, and if we could just scroll up just a tiny bit more. Yes, thank you. Under complaints, paragraph 5, the Grenfell Action Group blog continues with negative comment. There has been a complaint from a resident in the adjacent finger blocks about ramp removal received in Jan 14 before Ryden appointed, which has been taken up by Councillor Blakeman and is being dealt with by Kieran Singh / Peter Madison. Now, that was written by you. Looking at that, does that trigger a recollection about whether in fact you did see the Stairs of Shame blog on the 19th of August?
The second paragraph there refers to an external ramp, which had, I think, 8 steps in it, which was an alternative access from the walkway down to the street level. So it's not the stairs that you showed me previously, it's a different item.
What was the reference then to the Grenfell Action Group blog continuing with negative comment? What was that a reference to?
I suspect that Peter Madison had brought to my attention, he would intermittently look at it, he would have brought to my attention something, but I don't remember what it was, but I wouldn't be looking at this stage.
I see. Are you sure you hadn't read the blog on that day and as a result of that put that into this message or this report?
No, I suspect I would have had something pointed out to me, and as I was doing this report I thought, well, I would put this in because there was it comes under the complaints area.
I see.
So I don't know what it was, and I'd say it would have been on somebody else's screen.
Right. The date of the Stairs of Shame blog is the 13th of August, and the date of this is the 19th of August. Does that help you?
As I say, they're 2 totally different staircases. There is no connection between this comment here and the blog photo. There was another staircase.
Right. So although the blog was blocked on the system, it does seem that Peter Madison, at least, could have access to them from time to time and then would relay what he'd seen to you. Is that right?
I think you could ask to have it reinstated.
Right.
But so Peter Madison may dip into it, but I say I don't know how often he looked, but I think he had it on his system if he wanted to look.
Do you actually remember Peter Madison telling you the gag blog is continuing with negative comment?
I think I was aware anyway, because I know Councillor Blakeman would quite often refer to it. So I knew it was still going on. But I don't remember what this particular one is about. But I do know, that you could ask to have the block removed from your PC, and I know Peter did.
Now, I'd like to turn to the topic of complaints policy. In your first witness statement, if we can go to that, please, you say at paragraph 132 on page 24, paragraph 132, under the heading Defecting Reporting / Complaints, you say all complaints and issues raised by residents on works were initially directed to Ryden's RLOs for progression within Ryden whilst they were on site. I would then take up any matter that could not be straightforwardly resolved. What kind of matters would not be straightforwardly resolved, as you put it?
It could be that, say, Ryden had been working on an area, let's say, a duct in the hallway, and then the resident would say to them, well, look, that's chipped. and they would say, well, that's not our work. So then it would still be the resident would still perceive it as perhaps Ryden's work. So I would come in then and say, no, that's something the TMO need to deal with.
I see. Now, can we go to your second statement, please? Page 19. TMO 00842-312, page 19, paragraph 81. And you say there, it's important to distinguish between complaints made by residents, concerns raised by residents, and queries raised by residents. The majority of communications I had with residents throughout the refurbishment project were not responding to complaints, but rather addressing queries from residents to do with the works undertaken in their individual properties. And then you go on. How did you yourself define a complaint?
A complaint, I would say, would be something that was could be multifaceted. It could be serious and sort of organisational. It could be something that couldn't be resolved quickly and straightforwardly.
And how would you define a concern?
A concern would be, Ryden didn't turn up, where are they?
Why is that not a complaint?
Because it could be that Ryden, their workers tended to work in pairs, and it could be they'd been longer at Mrs. Smith's, so they didn't get to this residence at the allocated time, purely because they were held up in another property. So find out where they are. Sorry, they've been delayed, they've found problems at Mrs. Smith's, they'll be with you in 10 minutes.
And how did you define a query?
A query would be, why are you doing it like this? Or about perhaps the process rather than anything else. So it could be anything. You obviously, there's a bit of common sense here. So a query could be, why are you doing works in number 6 and not in my flat, or something like that. It could be just a straightforward question just about the process.
And what would be the distinction between a concern raised by a resident and a query raised by a resident?
Negligible. I suspect if I put just one word, I should have said concern stroke queries. It's a terminology issue. But
right.
Appreciate while you're working in people's homes over a period of 2 years, we saw a gamut of everything.
Yes, indeed. And I'm bound to suggest to you that the distinctions between a complaint and a concern and a query are themselves negligible, or at least easily blurred.
As I say, I think that complaints I would think if they were, say, multifaceted, can't be dealt with easily, or if they were more serious and organisational, would be my own distinction. I'm obviously not got the TMO policy in front of me. This is my own take on it. But concerns or queries, again, they could be something I followed up in writing. If it was, say, a query about the process, I might, having taught the resident through it face to face, I might then put it in writing just to make sure they had something to refer to in case one of their friends asked the question. So, so either of those, even though I might have dealt with them face to face, I could have followed up in writing, email, whatever.
Did you report on concerns and queries within the TMO?
No, we didn't. I would, if a resident had a concern and then it proliferated, if it didn't resolve, I perhaps would have escalated it. But I can't think of anything that would come into that category.
And something that you saw as a complaint as you define it, did you record that?
If there'd been anything that had come to my attention as a complaint or come to housing management's or Ryden's, I would have recorded it, yes.
Right. And where would you have recorded it?
I would have used one of the systems called CRM, Customer Relationship Manager,
Right.
which was one of the newer systems the TMO had. It was one of the most user-friendly. It had all the repairs on, and it was easiest for everyone to use. There was pop-ups, there was prompts on it. So, for example, if people had mobility issues, couldn't get to the doorbell, in 5 minutes there'd be a little note on CRM saying allow time for resident to get to the door.
Right.
So it was CRM was the most user-friendly system the TMO had to record complaint, and say complaints was a pop-up as well.
I see. But is it right that would require you and others at the TMO to exercise a judgment about whether what you were being told was a complaint, which would then have to be recorded in the way you've described, or was a concern or query, which would not?
No, as I've said, if a concern or query continued, I then would have treated it as a complaint.
Right. Can we look at the complaints policy you've referred to? That's at TMO 00879-692. And what I'm going to show you is the version of the complaints policy at the time of the fire. And you can see that on page 1. It's dated the 30th of July 2015 and agreed by the TMO board in the September of that year, and was reviewed, or to be reviewed, in July 2018. In fact, do you remember that when you arrived at the TMO, that you were provided with the TMO complaints policy dated May 2010?
I was provided with a big folder, and I suspect that would have been in it.
Did you read it?
If it was in there, I would have read it at the time, yes.
Let's read it into the record, but also just quickly look at it. TMO 00831-399, please. Let's just pop that up. And there's the first page of it. Can we look at the second page of it? Introduction. And this is May 2010, as you can see. Paragraph 1.1, all of our residents and customers that use our services have a right to expect a good service from the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation, and to have things put right when they go wrong. That's just the first sentence. But do you remember reading this when you first joined the TMO in September 2013?
I don't remember explicitly when I joined in September 13, no. But if it was in the booklet, if it was in the pack I had, I would have read it.
Right. I'd like to use, if I can, the version that was revised in the summer of 2015. If we can just go back to that. That's the previous document. TMO 00879-692, please. And if we can go to page 2, first of all. There you see, again, paragraph 1.1. Just looking at it, were you familiar with the complaints policy from 2013 and with this document, which is a revised version of it, from the summer of 2015?
I was aware that there was a policy, yes.
Yeah, were you familiar with it?
Probably I was when it first came out, but then perhaps I'd need to be refreshed on it.
Well, did you ever read it?
I would have read it when it first came out. I think it was rolled out. I think there was work done with each team on it.
Well, when the 2015 version was rolled out in September of 2015, did you read it?
Yes.
Right. Can we go to page 3, please? Now, here we can see that there is a heading, Inquiry or Complaint, and under 3.1, an inquiry, a service request, is defined as, quotes, a first-time request for information, advice, or for an action to be undertaken, e.g. estate cleaning not undertaken, estate lighting not working, or a repair request. A complaint may arise as a result of a service request not being actioned. 3.2, a complaint, a service failure, is defined as an expression of dissatisfaction about a KCTMO service or a service provided by a KCTMO contractor, not resolved immediately to the customer's satisfaction about the level, quality or nature of a service which the customer feels should have been provided. And then under 3.3, there's a long or longish list of the potential topics of complaint. You can see what those are. I won't read them all out to you, but the last two, rude, unhelpful or inappropriate behaviour by staff, poor communication. Were you familiar with the different definitions and categorisations as between inquiry on the one hand and complaint on the other?
I think when I gave my understanding, it does align with this.
But were you familiar with that distinction?
I did say that if it proliferated, I would escalate it.
Right.
So, yeah, I'd say I did understand this, even though I've perhaps not phrased it the same way as this. My understanding was this.
When you were responding to complaints properly so called, in other words, falling within this definition, did you use this policy?
Yes, you would read this.
You say, yes, you would read this, but did you personally follow the guidance in this policy when entertaining complaints?
Yes.
You did. Can we go to page 11, please, in this document, and look at paragraph 4.1? Time limit for making a complaint. And there's the time limit set out. And then...
we need to scroll down a bit.
Yes, absolutely. There's the time limit there, and it's a 12-month time limit.
Well, I'm trying to... Oh,
I'm sorry, I'm actually looking at the wrong screen. Can we go to page 11, please? We haven't moved on, I don't think.
there is a 12 months time limit referred to in paragraph 4.1, which we now have on the screen.
Yeah. Can we go to page 8, please? And paragraph 17. Monitoring and review, and over the page at 9, 17.1, performance on complaints against agreed targets and trends will be reported to the Operations Committee and the TMO board. Performance information will also be available on our website and through our link Resident Magazine. Did you play any part yourself in reporting targets and trends to the Operations Committee, or performance against those targets and trends?
No, that would probably be the complaints team who led on that.
Right. Can we please go to TMO 100400839, please? Now this is... Wait for it to come up.
Yes, we have it, Mr. Millett.
Yes. Yes, I think I've got a wrong reference, and I'm going to come back to that later on. Do you remember whether there was any oversight of managers' investigations into complaints generally?
The complaints team themselves would pick up from CRM what the issues were. Then I believe they would take it to managers if there was any shortfall in performance, if targets weren't being met, or if they felt that the complaint responses were inadequate. But so they would take that up with the managers of each department.
And do you remember the guidance which told you that if you received what you thought was a complaint, then you were responsible for forwarding that on promptly to the complaints team, either by telephone or by email? Yes,
they monitored the system, so unless they had the full information, they couldn't do it. So
right.
Yes.
Now, can I ask you about some specific complaints? When you came to give evidence in Module 1 last year, on the 20th of October last year, you were asked about David Collins's email of the 6th of April 2015, And I'm going to show you that email and at the same time have the transcript up if we can. The email is TMO 00846-104. At the same time, if we can please have up the transcript for day 56 at page 166. I'll show you the email first and then show you the transcript. You may remember being shown this last time, but in the second paragraph of Mr. Collins' email to you of the 6th of April, he says, as you know, on the 17th March 2015, upwards of 100 residents gathered in our community rooms to attend an emergency meeting to discuss our community's concerns regarding the Grenfell Tower improvement works. Details of the meeting and outcomes can be found summarised below. And then 2 paragraphs down, there's a heading, Problems with the Works, and then a list of bullet points. And if you just take a second to look at those bullet points there. And then if we look across, once you've read those bullet points, to the right-hand side of the screen, and at line 3, I asked you about this list, and you are asked the question at line 6. Looking at that, is it right that you were aware when you received this email at the very least about complaints and concerns about the quality of work being conducted by Ryden? And your answer at line 10, you said, I know that this was really useful to get an understanding of residents' views. I'm aware that in relation to that first point about appalling standard of work undertaken by Ryden in communal areas, a photograph had been taken of works in progress, i.e. not the finished work, so that was something that we were able to deal with. Now, you said at the time that David Collins' concerns about standards of work was a specific incident where work had not been completed. In fact, it's right, isn't it, that on the 6th of January 2016, so some 9 months later, do you remember that the Grenfell Tower residents petitioned the RBKC Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee?
I was aware they'd put in a petition, yes.
And do you remember that they were seeking an independent investigation of the regeneration works?
Yes.
Now, I don't know, were you present on the 6th of January 2016 at a meeting at which Edward Defan spoke to or addressed the committee?
No.
You weren't?
No.
There is a written version of the speech, and I just want to ask you about that. Can you go, please, to TMO 00831-064? Now, this is entitled Resident Speech to Scrutiny Committee, 6th January 2016. And it starts, thank you for allowing the residents of Grenfell Tower the opportunity to inform the Scrutiny Committee of the ill treatment, incompetence and plain abuse that we have experienced at the hands of the TMO during the Grenfell Tower improvement works. Now, if you just cast your eye down that screen and then lower down the page, if we could just have that scrolled down, please, a bit further so we can see the title of the next part, Lack of Consultation / Resident Engagement. My first question is, have you ever seen this document before?
Yes.
Did you see it at the time, January 2016?
I don't think so. I don't think I saw it for a month or two after that.
Right, so you did see it, you do think, in the February or March of 2016?
Yeah, I didn't see it immediately.
No, but not long afterwards?
Mm.
I see. Let me just show you one part of it. Page 3, please. And it's under the heading Poor Workmanship and Site Management. And I'll just read you 2 paragraphs, the first 2. The Grenfell Tower RA is calling for an independent investigation into the awful quality of individual works and the general poor management of the improvement works project. There are far too many examples of poor quality works and poor site management to list to you individually, but some examples include a number of residents who were left without any hot water for months on end, a vulnerable, disabled, non-English speaking woman being denied a toilet in her own home for 3 days and being forced to walk to her friends in Shepherd's Bush in order to take a shower for 3 months. Other examples of poor workmanship and site management include the shoddy design of the communal hallway cupboards, the lack of care and concern by a number of contractors to deliver a proper job inside residents' homes, heating pipes being laid across residents' carpets, existing decorations inside residents' properties destroyed, and little effort from the TMO to make good any of the damage they've caused as a result of removing radiators, and even one example of workmen using a pet dog's water bowl belonging to a resident as a vessel to drain a toilet system. Were you yourself made aware of these concerns raised by residents or a resident to the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee at the time?
In the first paragraph, it talks too many examples of poor quality works. So I don't know what that means. It's not specific.
Right.
I don't know about a number of residents who are left without any hot water for months on end, that they would have been screaming, and I'm not aware of anybody in that situation. I don't know about the vulnerable, disabled, non-English speaking women being denied a toilet. I don't know about that. I would deny the shoddy design of the communal hallway cupboards. I would also deny the lack of care concern by a number of contractors. I don't know anything about heating pipes being laid across residents' carpets. Existing decorations in residents' properties destroyed. I think there were 1 or 2 cases where Ryden went back and dealt with issues that were decorative, possibly when the radiators went in. And I know about the workman who used the pet's water bowl, and in fact that workman not only went back to apologise to that resident, but also I believe they paid him for a new dog bowl. So I'm aware of some specific incidents, but the generalised ones I do not know about.
Right. After you saw this list, or these 2 paragraphs in the month or 2 after the speech, did you yourself investigate what is said here?
We had asked through the compact, I think, them to be specific about where the complaints were coming from so that we could deal with them. As you appreciate, generalised comments you cannot deal with. You know, I would love to be knocking on doors and saying, look, I've heard you've got a problem, let me help you. This does not give us the meat to do that. But as I say, the compact were asked when they first brought up the generalised comments to come back to us with specific issues. Because also we need to know about these things straight away so we can deal with them.
Talking of knocking on doors, I think it's right, isn't it, that the TMO actually carried out a door-knocking survey in December 2015 and spoke to 77 of the 120 households about the works. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can I just show you the document? It's TMO 00831-064. And I'll just show you parts of this. Look at page 1 to start with. TMO 00831-064. And we go to page 9 in this. You can see under paragraph 8, door knocking survey, December 2015. And if we look at the foot of the page, we get the figures I've just put to you. And then the summary of the feedback is received is as follows. And over to page 10, you can see it says 90% of the residents confirmed that improvements to the heating and hot water were working effectively. 85% of residents confirmed that they understood how to operate the new heating system. 83% of residents are happy with the new windows. 97% confirmed that they understood how to operate the windows. Now, it's right, in fact, isn't it, just looking at that those results are based on a series of narrow questions about very specific aspects of the refurbishment, aren't they?
I actually was on this, but I don't remember the survey form, I'm afraid.
Did you, when you saw the speech, did you carry out an investigation into Mr. Defarn's complaints about the quality of the workmanship that he listed, so far as he listed them?
As I say, it was very generalised. Just trying to think. Sorry, can you give me the chronology again between this door knocking and when was the speech by Mr. Defarn?
Yeah, the door knocking was in December 2015.
Yeah.
2015.
Yeah, I was on it, so I remember.
Yeah, and the speech was the 6th of January 2016.
Right, okay.
And I think you said you saw this document, of which these results form a part, a month or two later. So that's the chronology.
Yeah.
Did you actually carry out an investigation into Mr. Defarn's complaints in his speech, so far as he listed them specifically?
I believe by then the compact was up and running, so I don't know whether through the compact we asked him to clarify. But I don't personally remember, it would have been Peter Madison who would have led on that. But I don't remember personally doing anything unless it went through the compact, and then we had a matrix of issues.
Well, the matrix of issues had started, in fact, with Judith Blakeman's assistance in the August of 2015.
Yeah.
And then there was another version published in the May, or produced in the May of 2016. But at this point, so this is 5 months or so after the first matrix was produced, which was very detailed, were you not concerned that there were still potential issues with the quality of the works that you were project managing?
So I didn't see it a bit later, and I would think the compact would have given more specific issues. You appreciate Mr. Defarn's speech seemed to be a headline issue, didn't it? He didn't say, on this floor there's an issue, on that floor there's a problem. And I would say as well that we had our clerk of works employed by the TMO, and their comment was that the quality on the scheme was, if out of 10, it was consistently an 8 out of 10. There were issues with progress, but in terms of the quality of work, the clerk of works reports, which went throughout the project, were giving the quality rating as high. So I think, if we'd heard the specific information, if there was a problem, then I would hope that it would have been resolved, that it would be something that was historic and not ongoing.
Now, you agreed with me a moment ago that there were these two matrices of refurbishment issues, one in August 15 and one in May 16. Let's just look at the second of those two, at MET 3045755. Do you remember seeing this document?
Yes.
You do. And just scanning down it, for those not familiar with it, you can see that it's divided into columns. There's a number column, there's an outstanding issue column, and then there's a TMO, RIDE, and RBKC response column. Were the issues listed in the matrix registered as complaints with the complaints team?
I don't think so. I think because it was an ongoing piece of work that I didn't register it, and I don't think Peter did either. I think it was still, wider issues. It's not a single topic complaint.
Why weren't these issues listed in the matrix registered as complaints to be dealt with by the TMO complaints team?
Yeah, as I say, I suspect because you can see from some of these comments that, for example, the first one in the response, it says we're waiting for feedback on resident survey. And so there are a lot of things that are works in progress. They're sort of a continuous thing where they're being monitored, and I believe the complaints process wouldn't have been the best forum for this unless you set it up as complaint by the compact. There are many issues, and some of them are, say, ongoing, and so they wouldn't have a closeout date.
So, do I take it from that the concern, I don't want to use the word concerns or queries or complaints, but the matters raised in the matrices, both August 15 and May 16, were investigated and dealt with by the TMO outside the complaints policy?
I believe so, because I don't remember ever seeing any of these issues on the complaints log. But I say, the reason for that would be that they were ongoing, that there was discussion between parties. It's like, you know, if you have a regular meeting set up and there are things outstanding, you keep track of them through the meeting and log them as actions and resolution time. Some of these, if they're dependent on discussion with residents, it means that it's quite hard to pin an end date on them.
Was there a clear system in operation from the middle of 2015? Let's take that date, which is the time when the compact is recognised, July 15, taking us through August 15 and down to May 16. Was there a system operating clearly within the TMO which would tell you which Grenfell-related complaints would be dealt with within the matrix system, if you like, and which would be dealt with under the TMO's standing complaints policy?
I don't think there was, but as I say, the compact was being led from my team, from my director, and it seems more, I don't know his stance on this, but for me, this seems more appropriate to keep it outside the complaint system.
Right. What would you do if a complaint had an origin before the refurbishment, but now intersected with the refurbishment? Such as, for example, concerns about fire safety in the building, which predated the refurbishment, but which might have been seen to be exacerbated by the refurbishment. Which system would it fit into? The complaint system or the matrix system?
I'm not sure. I think it all needs a little bit more thought, and I think you could be splitting hairs a little bit to the extent here as to which some would be on the complaint system and some. This was an ongoing discussion with a resident group. There'll be other issues that other people were discussing, which again would perhaps not be appropriate for the complaint system.
Right, I see. Just so I can understand supervision and lines of reporting, you were obviously at the front end of receiving this. Who was supervising you in your management or resolution of these concerns or issues?
I wasn't at the front end of receiving this. This went to Peter Madison.
Oh, I see. Went direct to him, did it?
Yeah.
Did you have any role in these?
Well, yes, he would then show it to me and we would talk about what I needed to do to resolve issues that were in my area of responsibility. And then he would write the response.
Right. Were you concerned when you saw the matrix dated May 60 that there were still issues being raised by residents?
No, I felt it was a positive sign that the compact was doing something active and that the relationship was improving, that we were able to discuss these things.
Now, looking at page 3 of this document, if we can, you can see under item 10, there's something under the heading drafts and poor workmanship. A number of windows are not properly installed and there are lots of drafts. The shutters are making excessive noise in some flats. And it goes on in that vein. And then the heating keeps being cut off. Residents would like to have a timetable setting out when all outstanding matters will be finalised. And then resolution column, all reported window issues have been resolved by Ryden, with residents signing to say they're happy with works completed. Do you know who completed the entry on behalf of TMO Ryden there?
I would think that would be Peter.
Right. Were you aware yourself of the reported issues with windows?
Yes, we had, I would think of the concerns raised. I think the windows is probably one of the issues that I would say that we were taking seriously, because there were issues in terms of resident use and then installation.
Now, I may come back to windows in due course, if we need to. Can I then move on to a slightly different topic, which is the vote of no confidence? Can we please go to RBK 3054227? This is an email from Kitty Mortimer at RBKC to Roger Keane at RBKC, both involved in housing. It's dated the 16th of June 2014, and it appears to forward a Grenfell Action Group newsletter. And if we can just look down at page 2, please. It has a bit of graffiti on the wall. Listen to the voiceless, and then 4 paragraphs down. I should read you the first paragraph. All residents of Grenfell Tower, tenants, leaseholders, renters, etc., are invited to attend an emergency residence meeting to be held in the caretaker's office, etc. The meeting will be run by the residents of the Grenfell Tower for the residents of Grenfell Tower. RBKC councillors, Labour and Conservative, officers and representatives of the TMA will not be invited. And then 2 paragraphs on from that, we wish to discuss a vote of no confidence in Claire Williams and the TMO and their ability to manage the Grenfell Tower improvement works properly. We wish to discuss the TMO's refusal to allow the residents of Grenfell Tower to form a residents group to help us through the improvement works. And then it goes on over the page. I think we don't need to see that, and in fact, there's nothing there. My question here is, do you remember the Grenfell Action Group calling for a vote of no confidence in you, Miss Williams?
I would have seen that, yes.
What did you do about that?
I probably would have talked to my manager, David, and Peter Madison.
Right. Do you remember doing so?
I don't, but obviously it was a while ago. So.
Right. Were you generally aware of the resentment, at least according to this message, that members of the Grenfell Action Group felt towards you personally?
No, generally it was directed towards my director.
Do you know what the the outcome? Excuse me. Do you know what the outcome of this meeting was?
Sorry, which year was it? Was it
This is June 2014.
2014. No, you will have to refresh my memory, I'm afraid.
Did anybody in the housing department discuss this with you?
I don't remember, sorry.
Right. I mean, were you concerned in the summer of 2014, so only 6 months or so after you arrived at the TMO, that at least according to this gag blog post of June 2014, there was such an atmosphere of hostility and distrust towards you personally over your management of the refurbishment?
No, because again, I was talking to residents at drop-in and I felt there was no animosity towards me. People were saying thank you for explaining things. So obviously I was aware that there was this sort of swell underneath, but what I was seeing face to face with residents was that they knew we were getting on with the job. They knew that we were on site, and that they had particular issues perhaps to their own property, but not as not across the board. It was.
Right. And the drop-ins were drop-ins that, is this right, that the TMO had arranged in order to engage with the residents about the refurbishment?
Yeah, to show them different elements like the HIU, the say windows, the heating, that sort of thing.
Well, let me explore that issue a little bit further next. Can we go, please, to the newsletter for 1st of August 2012? Now, I appreciate this is some 13 months or so before you arrived at the TMO. This is at TMO 00838-191. And I'm going to focus, when we look at consultation, on the question of the cladding, the exterior rain screen. And if you look at that document, it's dated the 1st of August 2012. First, is this document familiar to you?
Yes.
Did you see this document or this kind of document when you first arrived at the TMO in September 2013?
Yes, it was in Paul Dunkerton's directories.
Right. If we look then at the first page, there's feedback from residents. You see that? Yes. And then if you go to page 3, please. This is as a result of a meeting on the 26th of July 2012. It says, under cladding systems, in the blue oblong box on the left, various cladding options have been shown to residents, with the composite zinc cladding system being favoured by the majority. You see that?
Yes.
And then it goes on to give the advantages. And then if we go to the next document, the choice of zinc is reiterated. This is TMO 100499897. This is only a week or so later. This is a week or so before, actually. This is the lead up to it. And then if you go to page 3, we can actually see the 9th of August. So this is a week or so later, feedback. And if you go to the first page, you'll see a little chronology and a lot happening at the end of July and early August. You see that?
Yes.
And then under the entry for 26 July 2012, it says, evening consultation, meeting and daytime drop-in sessions, external canopy. Residents would like to see a new canopy which offers protection and shelter around the block. External cladding proposal favourable to residents seemed to be for profiled zinc. Although we seem to have some feedback on the type of cladding, it is still undecided on your preferred colour for the cladding. Just first, in relation to the canopy, I know you arrived more than a year later, but what happened to the proposal from the residents that there should be a new canopy offering protection and shelter around the block?
It's my understanding that the canopy was there specifically because things had dropped out of higher level windows, and it was to protect people walking at ground floor level. But when it went to the planners, I think the planners wanted the building to have an unencumbered front entrance. They wanted it to be a neater, cleaner look. And so the planners were not keen on a canopy. And meanwhile, Siobhan Rumble, who was the neighbourhood housing manager, was doing work with residents about why things were falling out of the windows. I think generally it was to do with the fact that people had the windows open and the curtains knock things out. It wasn't, I don't think it was people always, having a fight and throwing things out of the window. It was just that things were falling off windowsills. There was a chap on one floor who Dad had dementia and he was throwing things out the window. But otherwise, they had cameras on the outside and they actually identified, I think on 1 or 2 elevations, where the stuff was coming from. So housing management did quite a lot of work to actually understand where things were dropping from, stop residents doing it. And then obviously the planners weren't keen on it because they thought it destroyed the entrance to the building, the view of the block. It's an aesthetic thing.
Right. So do I take it from that answer that RBKC, to your knowledge, essentially overruled or ignored the residents' desire for the protection and shelter around the block that a new canopy would offer in favour of the aesthetic look?
That's probably you've been very good at summarising my view. I don't know if that was the actual view, but that is what I've been led to understand.
I see. Moving on then to the question of zinc. Both of these letters, as I've said to you, clearly I hope, predate your time at the TMO by just over a year. Yeah. And I think you say they were on the Paul Dunkerton directory when you came in. So can I take it that you were familiar with the previous discussions and consultations with residents about the zinc cladding when you started at the TMO?
I was aware because of these newsletters, but I don't know what else they were shown.
I see.
So these mention a lot of zinc, but I don't know what else was shown.
Now, can we go to TMO 008375999, please? This is a newsletter of October 2014, put out by the TMO and Ryden. It's a regeneration newsletter, and again, I assume that you were responsible, at least in part, for producing this document.
Yes.
Yes. And we can see on the front page a coffee morning. And if you go, please, to page 2, you can see at the very top of the page, cladding. The council has selected a smoke silver metallic grey colour for the cladding. You can still view a sample of this above the main entrance. We've started erecting a frame on the outside of the building on which to place the insulation and cladding. This will cause the external walls to vibrate, so please remove all valuable items away from walls connected to the outside of the building. If you need to escape the noise, please use the available quiet spaces mentioned above. And there below it is the colour chosen for the cladding, grey colour chosen for the cladding. Now, as far as you were aware, was it ever communicated to the residents that the material for the cladding had been changed from zinc to aluminium composite material, ACM?
We had lots of sample boards that the architects had produced, which were sort of large boards which showed cladding. I don't know what they showed. I think that the architects, as the second planning application was put in, I think these drawings all said cladding. I think some of them said zinc, but I think some of them said to be agreed or something like that, because at that time it was possible that zinc wasn't the only option. So I haven't looked for these architects' display boards in my system, but I think some of the drawings might have said zinc, some might have said cladding to be agreed.
With great respect, Ms. Williams, I find that a little bit surprising given the chronology, because we know, don't we, that from your Module 1 evidence and the record, that ACM was selected by the TMO finally in the earlier part of 2014, certainly by the end of July, and the planners had approved the change to ACM from zinc in late September 2014, to the best of my own recollection of the record, and here we are in October 2014. Is it really right that in October 2014 there was still discussion of an alternative for zinc?
I think it was a historic note on the drawings.
Right.
I don't think it was a new note. I think that some of the architect's drawings had been amended and some hadn't.
Right. Was the change from zinc to aluminium clearly signalled to the residents?
Not by myself, no.
By anybody else?
I don't know, I suspect not.
Do you know why that is?
I think, as you say, it wasn't agreed until we were... I think the mast climbers were already up before we'd agreed what we were going to use. I think we were quite a way in. So, no, it wasn't mentioned, and that was an omission.
Was the reason, and I think it would follow from your last answer that the answer is no, but let me ask anyway, was the reason for the switch from zinc to ACM ever communicated to the residents?
I can't remember that it was. I suspect not.
No. Is there a reason why the residents weren't asked for their view about whether instead of zinc there should be aluminium composite material?
I can't think there was a reason. I suspect it was because the decision wasn't made until the project was on site.
We can see that in this newsletter you say the council has selected a smoke silver metallic grey colour for the cladding. There's no reference here to the fact that in actual fact the council had not only selected smoke silver but had actually selected aluminium composite with a polyethylene core instead of zinc with a honeycomb core. Why wasn't that change, which was a change from the position in mid-2012, clearly communicated to the residents?
It wasn't communicated to the residents. I don't think, unless anybody had asked a specific question, I don't think they did. It was an omission rather than anything else, but I think it was because it was fairly late on in the scheme that that decision was made. And also because it was the council who obviously gave us planning approval, there was limited option for the residents to input into that. And I noticed from the previous newsletter you showed me that it said residents, they didn't seem to have a colour preference. Well, that would be the planners had the ultimate decision over what the colour finish was. It wasn't us, I'm afraid. It wasn't the TMO, and even the residents, because the planners were very mindful that the building was close to Westway motorway, and so they didn't want any distraction to motorists, and so they were fairly careful about what they wanted to choose.
Well, did you ever give the residents a specific opportunity, directed to them and for their own benefit, to study the options for cladding being discussed with the planners in the summer of 2014?
No, we didn't.
Why is that?
Because the planners would be the people who made the ultimate decision. That would be sort of trying to consult with them on something that we had no sway over. It would have been negative consultation, because you're saying, look at this, this is what do you want to do with it? But in fact, it was actually a planning decision as to what that final finish would be. So it would be lip service, it wouldn't be consultation.
Well, you say that, and although it may very well be the case that the planners would have the ultimate decision over the colour, the planners didn't have the ultimate decision over whether it should be zinc as opposed to ACM, which was a TMO decision, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes, and that decision was something that, do you accept, should have been the focus of consultation and engagement with the residents so that they could understand the reason for the change.
Yes, I think perhaps that the change of personnel between Paul Dunkerton and what he presented and where I'm coming from a starting point meant that there was a gap there, because I didn't know what he'd shown them, what was been on the table. So if I'd been aware that they'd all been shown this and they all loved this, and then it changed subsequently, I would probably have been keener to publicise. But I think perhaps the change in appointment meant that I didn't have that previous knowledge of what the residents had been shown and what they felt strongly about and what they didn't, because I would have obviously tried to be a consistent voice and say the change of personnel meant that that consistency didn't happen.
You'll remember from Module 1, and we looked at it, I think, at Module 1, that the NBS specification, which was sent as part of the tender package in November 2013, therefore under your watch, contained zinc Proteus with a honeycomb core as the prime choice, with a number of alternatives, one of which was Reynobond with a PE core. Given the fact that it was Reynobond with a PE core that was ultimately chosen by the TMO, rather than the zinc, why not give residents an opportunity, first of all, to know that, and second of all, to provide their views about it?
As you say, it would have been perhaps more productive to say, we did show you this, but it's become this. But I think the residents, what I probably concentrated in the newsletter as we're looking at it is the look of it, so that people can understand what it would be like finally. I didn't go back and say, look, you talked about this, but now we've got that. It was an omission on my part, and I say my view is that it was the change in personnel.
Now, can I then turn to... excuse me. Can we turn to, very briefly, back to fire safety advice to residents? Can I take you to your first witness statement, please, at page 18, paragraph 97? And you say here, I was not ultimately responsible. This is under the heading, the fire and safety measures within Grenfell Tower as of 14th June 2017. I was not ultimately responsible for fire and safety measures within the tower, but I am aware that on 17th of October 2014, Carl Stokes conducted a fire risk assessment for Grenfell Tower. I had met and knew Carl Stokes, but his engagement was by Janice Ray, TMO's health and safety manager. I believe I would have seen a copy of the fire risk assessment at the time. It recorded, amongst other things, that the fire strategy for residential areas was a stay-put strategy, which he confirmed meant residents remain within their own dwelling during a fire incident unless the fire is in that dwelling or it is otherwise affected, in which case they should immediately evacuate the dwelling and call the fire and rescue service. He went on to say that the fire service or TMO employees will arrange for a general evacuation of the building at any time if this is appropriate, or the resident can leave at any time if they so wish. He noted that information had been provided to all residents in the form of Tenant's handbook, letters and briefing sheets, etc., and articles on fire safety advice and emergency procedures were also included in the residents' magazine called Link. Now, we've covered already this morning, and I'm not going to go back over the means of communication with residents of fire safety advice. I just want to ask you a specific question about what you say here about TMO employees arranging for general evacuation of the building at any time. My question is, did you yourself ask Janice Ray or Carl Stokes which TMO employees would arrange for a general evacuation of the building if appropriate?
No.
Do you know who they were?
No.
Why did you leave that matter up in the air?
This would not be my area of business. As a project manager, I managed many different types of contracts. Some might be, as I said, I've done for TMO, I did a window replacement contract, a cavity fill contract, external works contracts. We had no general involvement with interior areas or ongoing management.
Did you ever ask Janice Ray, what are the arrangements for TMO employees to arrange or assist with general evacuation of the building if it became appropriate?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
Because again, as I say, my team dealt with contracts on the properties. You would be there for 4 months, but say possibly doing outside works. Most of the contracts we ran were outside works, apart from the kitchen and bathroom replacement programmes. So we weren't involved with the day-to-day management of the buildings.
Right. Was it not important for you to know what Carl Stokes meant here when he said that TMO employees will arrange for general evacuation of the building, given that you were managing the refurbishment project?
It was something that I knew was dealt with by other areas of the business, so I didn't interrogate him as to what his report, the detail of his report meant, no.
When you say you knew it was being dealt with by other areas of the business, can you tell us, please, who that was?
The health and safety team would be talking to housing management about how because housing management had a longer term involvement in the building. As I say, the project management team that I worked in, we would deal with one contract in one block, then you move on, you deal with another contract in another area. So you have no long-term involvement with any of the properties. It's the Grenfell contract, you understand, was a one-off.
Indeed, but we've seen earlier this morning that you were involved on 2 occasions in putting fire safety advice, which refers to the stay put policy, into the regeneration newsletters. Yeah. Given that your responsibility, at least to that extent, can you explain why you didn't, when you saw what Carl Stokes had said in his fire risk assessment, seek to understand what arrangements there were for departing from the stay put policy and assisting with the undertaking of a full building or partial building evacuation?
As far as I was concerned, the emergency plan for the building was the same. And as I wasn't involved in the day-to-day management of that area, I didn't ask. And I think teams like mine work on many different contracts in different areas. It's
right.
So it was something I felt wasn't my
right.
role.
I'm just trying to ascertain in clear terms who was actually responsible for ensuring that there were arrangements in place for a general evacuation of the building at any time.
Yeah, no, I would assume it would be the health and safety team, housing management and the fire brigade.
Right. You say you assume, but did you actually yourself take any steps to make sure that they knew what it was that Carl Stokes himself had understood in this context?
I know that this report would have been sent to the appropriate people, so no.
I see. Well, let's look then a little bit more closely at fire risk assessments as a different topic. And first, within that topic, can I ask you about the extent of your role? Can we start with paragraph 51 of your second statement, please, at page 11? And you say on that page, at paragraph 51, under the heading Matters Raised in the Inquiry's Letter of 5th July 2017, you say, I would say that my role as project manager encompassed some aspects of fire safety and health and safety, and I've endeavoured to outline the extent of this involvement below. And we'll see that. But in your evidence in Module 1, you said that you hadn't, in fact, had any specific training in health and safety matters, and no training or detailed knowledge or experience of the legislation or regulations under the Fire Safety Regulatory Reform Order 2005. That's what you said at day 54, pages 88 to 89. Do you remember that evidence?
No, but I'm sure you can...
Right. I'm putting that to you, and I'm asking you just to confirm that. But that's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Right. Were you familiar with any of the specific guidance about fire safety for building owners?
I might have some knowledge from experience, but limited, I would suggest.
Okay, let me see if I can help you more specifically. Were you familiar at all with the Local Government Association's guidance published in July 2011 entitled Fire Safety in Purpose-Built Flats?
I don't think so, no.
were you familiar with the government's guidance that preceded it, called Fire Safety Risk Sleeping Accommodation, published in 2006?
No.
Were those pieces of guidance ever referred to at any time when you were at the TMO, just in passing?
I don't remember.
Right. In respect of the specifics of your own role, when it came to the fire risk assessments and the significant action plans produced by Carl Stokes,
Yeah.
if we look at paragraph 57 of your statement on page 12, if we can just flip to that, you say there, in the third line, if any of the findings identified related to the refurbishment works, Janice Ray would send Carl's report to me to forward to Ryden to complete. I would then liaise with Ryden for them to take forward. However, my understanding is that Carl Stokes would also attend Grenfell Tower to carry out fire safety inspections directly with Ryden. Now, to be clear, it's right, isn't it, I think from that you took responsibility for Carl Stokes' action points, at least so far as they related to the refurbishment.
Yes, Janice had to attribute them to somebody, and I would be the person for the refurbishment, yes.
Do you recall taking responsibility for any of the action points that did not concern the refurbishment?
I hope I wouldn't, because if they weren't part of my role, I shouldn't have taken them on.
So I think the answer is no, not knowingly.
Exactly.
Right. Now, can I then look at the next thing, which is an LFB site visit on the 12th of March 2014? And for that, we need to go to your first statement, please. Your first statement at page 32, paragraph 179. And you say there, the fire brigade visited Grenfell Tower on the 12th/13th March 2014 as arranged. In attendance from LFB were Ben Lewis, Matthew Ramsey and Dan Hallisey, and they made several observations in relation to the dry riser, doors open in firefighting situation, smoke vent to lobby and stair, etc. Matthew Ramsey was very unhappy with the dampers not being functional, and he referred to an enforcement notice. Bruce Soanes of Studio E Architects attended with me. Now, I think the reference there to Ben Lewis is a mistake for Ben Dewis, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you recall any discussion at that meeting about the lifts?
I know I wrote an email afterwards, but I don't remember what the email said.
Let me show it to you. TMO 10005454. And that's the first page of the email. And it's sent to you by Carl Stokes. But if we go to the second page, page 2, please, you can see what prompts that email, which we're going to come back to later. Here is the email from you to Janice Ray, copied to Carl Stokes and Bruce Soanes on the 12th of March 2014. Subject, Grenfell and Finger Blocks, visit with Fire Brigade. And you say in the introductory paragraph, I had a great time on site this AM with our architect and Daniel Hallisey and Matthew Ramsey and AN other from the Fire Brigade. We talked through our Grenfell scheme, specifically 4 issues. And then if you look at item 4, you say, Carl, can you please confirm that the lifts are either firemen's or firefighting? I did not realise there was a difference. Now, just pausing on that, does that prompt your recollection about what the conversation was about?
No, sorry. I'm not clear whether I'm just asking for clarification for my own education or whether it was discussed as an item. I don't remember.
Right. Do you remember whether there was a query from Ben Dewis or Matthew Ramsey or Dan Hallisey of the LFB over the type of lifts in the building?
Sorry, I don't remember.
Right. Do you know, or can you remember why either you or they were concerned about the type of lifts in the building?
It could have been a throwaway comment on their part, and they say I could be just trying to educate myself. So I don't remember enough.
Well, let's go up the chain and see if we can get some further detail from you about it. Carl Stokes responds at the top of page 1, and he says, Good afternoon to you both. Ref point 4, Claire, you are correct. Both are the same, and both lifts in Grenfell Tower are firefighting lifts. By the way, a fireman's lift is, definitions, noun, and then he refers to a method of carrying a person. And then underneath that, a firefighting lift is, and then he gives you a definition, a lift that must be installed in buildings over 18 metres in high or where the basement level is more than 10 metres below the ground floor level. Today it will conform to the requirements of EAN 8172 firefighting lifts. I think he's getting confused with fireman controls and fireman switches, etc., which are fitted to a firefighting lift. There are slight differences between a firefighting lift and an evacuation lift, though. Do you remember what you made of that response?
No, I think I'd asked Carl what it was, and he'd given me a definition.
Did you know if the lift in Grenfell Tower were intended to be used for evacuation purposes?
I don't know. I don't think this particularly helped me.
Right. Did you forward or otherwise convey the fact that Did you tell the LFB that the lifts in Grenfell Tower were firefighting lifts?
I wouldn't have told them because I hadn't understood the distinction. So
right. I mean, clearly you've been asked a question, passed it on to Carl Stokes and got an answer that they are firefighting lifts. Is there a reason why you didn't pass that back to the LFB?
As I say, I don't know they actually asked the question. It could have been me. I might have heard in conversation saying, well, you know, if it was a firefighting lift. And I thought, oh, I don't know what that is. So it could have been me just asking a question to Carl so that I, was more educated in what the differences were. I don't know that they asked a question.
Right. I mean, it does appear from the email that you sent Claire Williams that I've just shown you that your question about whether the lifts were firefighting lifts had arisen as a result of discussion of the Grenfell scheme. And then you asked Carl Stokes the question, given the source of the question in your mind, which you then passed on to Carl Stokes, why is it that you didn't simply pass the information back to the LFB?
I think if it had been a specific question from the LFB, I would have said, is this a firefighting lift? We need to tell the LFB. I didn't ask it that way. So that's why I think it's more me trying to understand what the difference is. Because I've specifically, if you look at the way that I've phrased the rest of it, it's clear they need a response. Whereas in that one, it was more saying, Carl, what's the difference? So I think I can't tell whether they did ask a question. I suspect from my phraseology they didn't, because I haven't asked the question in the right way for Carl to respond.
Having been told by Carl Stokes that the lifts were firefighting lifts, what were you going to do with that information?
I think it was possibly something for me just to understand, but I still wouldn't understand, and as it says here, there is a slight difference between a firefighting lift and an evacuation lift. So I haven't asked that. I haven't gone back and asked more. So I think this is purely for me to understand the issue.
Were you aware during your role as project manager in relation to the refurbishment that the lifts at Grenfell Tower did not in fact meet the full firefighting lift standards?
No, I wouldn't know that.
Did you ever raise or discuss the issue of firefighting lifts with Apex or Ryden or any other contractors during the refurbishment?
No.
Do you recall a discussion about flat entrance doors in Grenfell Tower?
The new ones and the old ones we probably talked about.
Right. Do you remember a discussion with the LFB about that topic?
Not myself with the LFB. I would have talked to Ryden, I would have talked to residents, the occupational therapist, but I didn't talk to the LFB about the fire doors at all.
Can we then look back at your email below this one to Janice Ray of the 12th of March, page 2. I've shown you paragraph 4. If we look at paragraph 2 in that page, you said this. Matthew was very unhappy about the existing state of the smoke vents to each lobby. Of those looked at, about 30% were not in the right position. I've been chasing RGE for 2 months now on their servicing records and had nothing back. Janice, do you want to chase Simon Coleman or Dill on this, as I'm obviously getting nowhere? Matthew said about issuing us with a notice to confirm fully functional in 6 weeks, but maybe I can deal with Daniel on this, assuming that we do have some servicing records. Did Matthew Ramsey explain to you that there was no working smoke management system in the building?
I think he was talking about a deficiency notice, but I don't know exactly what he said about the system. I suspect there were areas of it that weren't working. I don't know if it was all not working.
Right. I mean, you're right that he did in fact issue a deficiency notice, but that was later in the month, 24th of March 2014. At this point, 12th of March 2014, do you remember whether Mr. Ramsey told you or explained to you that the smoke management system wasn't working?
I think there was something about it that was working, but not the whole lot.
Right. Do you remember what?
Recollection. I think the deficiency notice to tell you, but I thought that the smoke detectors were going to the panel. They were flagging up upon the panel if there was a fire, but I don't know about the vents to each lobby. So that's my recollection, is that there was a bit of it that was working, but not the whole system.
Now, you say you've been chasing RGE for 2 months on their servicing records. Why had you been trying to obtain the service records?
I believe as part of Ryden's tender pack, we gave them the certificates we had on many of the elements that had been serviced. And I think we'd had something, but there was a report that they should have been again. They should have done a further test. And Ryden was saying, can we have a copy of that? Because they were obviously doing their health and safety reports. So I think I was getting it for our contractor so that they could understand the situation, because I think the previous certificate we'd given them was maybe August 13 or something like that.
Right. Was your request for the service records prompted by queries from Max Forden, do you remember, about the nature of the existing smoke control system?
It could have been Ryden or Max Forden, thank you. Yeah, it was somebody on the project who was asking
Right.
about
And do you know why it was
simply
taking so long to get the records out of RGE?
Well, I wasn't sure that I was talking to the right person anyway.
Right. Mr. Chairman, let me just finish this mini line off before 1 o'clock, if I may.
Right.
Let me show you one more document. Can I ask you then to go, in the light of that answer, just to finalise this, MAX 404262, please. You refer to Dill in your email of the 12th of March. And this is an email from Dill Singh of RGE to Matt Smith of the 23rd of January 2014. Matt Smith is Max Fordham. And this is something like 6 weeks or so before the 12th of March. And he's attaching a report on the vent system and recommendations. And if you look at the email, he says in the third paragraph, we have stated every service to the TMO that in the event of an activation, we cannot guarantee that the system will work. Had Dill Singh provided you with that information?
No, I don't think I've seen this email before.
No, you may not have done.
Yeah, I think that's why he probably wasn't communicating with me. He'd already sent the report to Matt from Max Fordham. So, no, I don't think he ever provided it to me, and I think this is the first report that I know that they've sent to Max Fordham, because I hadn't seen this before.
So when he says, we have stated every service to the TMO that in the event of an activation, we cannot guarantee that the system will work. Did you know that?
No.
Right. Mr. Chairman, that's a convenient moment, I think. I'm in the middle of a line of examination, and it'll probably take me a little bit longer than 5 minutes to complete
Well, it would probably be sensible then to break now, wouldn't it?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Ms. Williams, it's time we had a break for everyone to have some lunch. Please remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it when you're out of the room. And we'll resume at 2 o'clock, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. 2 o'clock, please. Okay.